In the vast wilderness of the Caribou Mountains, a man named Jake lives with two magnificent wildcats. A strikingly white Canadian lynx he named Luna, and a vibrant, curious bobcat he called Rusty. It began one chilly morning when he stumbled upon two orphaned cubs. Jake, a wildlife rehabilitator by profession and deeply passionate about animals, took them in without hesitation. He raised the lynx and the bobcat together, but what happened when they grew up would shock everyone. The fragile peace they have built is about to be tested. Can a man truly share his life with creatures born for the wild, or will nature's call prove irresistible? Prepare yourself, because what unfolds next is not just surprising, it's unforgettable. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The wind was a cruel sculptor. It howled through the Caribou Mountains of British Columbia, carving the snow into ghost-like drifts and stripping the skeletal branches of aspen trees bare. For Jake Carter, a man whose heart had long been frozen by a grief as vast and silent as the wilderness around him, it was just another day. His cabin, a sturdy creation of Douglas fir logs he'd hewn himself, was his fortress against both the elements and a world he no longer felt a part of. Jake had come to this seclusion not by choice, but by necessity. 5 years prior, a slick patch of ice on a Vancouver highway had stolen his wife, Sarah, and their 6-year-old daughter, Lily. The silence that followed their absence was a deafening roar that drove him from the city, from the sympathetic glances and hollow words of comfort. He had been a biologist, a man of data and observation. Now he was just a ghost himself, tending to the wounds of the wild as a way to ignore his own. As a licensed wildlife rehabilitator, his solitude was often interrupted by the chirps, squeals, and whimpers of injured or orphaned creatures. It was a purpose, however faint, in a life that had lost its direction. The storm that would change everything arrived without subtlety. It was a maelstrom of white fury, a blizzard that raged for 2 days, burying the landscape under a thick, suffocating blanket. When it finally broke, an eerie silence descended, the world muffled and pristine. Jake, driven by a nagging unease, strapped on his snowshoes. The forest was his parish, and he felt a duty to check on its inhabitants. He hadn't gone more than a mile from his cabin when he saw it. A great, ancient cedar, a landmark he often used for navigation, had succumbed to the storm's violence. Its massive trunk lay splintered across a game trail, a tombstone of wood and snow. Beneath the tangle of its lower branches, a patch of tawny fur was visible. Jake's heart, a slow and heavy drum in his chest, picked up its tempo. Carefully, he worked his way closer, his snowshoes crunching in the deep powder. It was a female Canadian lynx, her magnificent tufted ears still and her life-giving warmth long since surrendered to the cold. Her body was partially crushed by a heavy limb, a tragedy, but a common one in this untamed land. He was about to turn away, a silent prayer on his lips, when he heard it. A mewling so faint it was nearly stolen by the breeze. He dropped to his knees, digging frantically at the snow around the deceased lynx. There, nestled against her mother's cold belly, was a tiny ball of fluff. It was impossibly small, its fur a startling, almost luminous white against the snow, a rare leucistic coat. Its eyes, the color of a frozen lake, were barely open and clouded with confusion and fear. It shivered violently, a fragile life flickering in the face of certain death. Without a second thought, Jake unzipped his heavy parka, He gently scooped up the cub, which let out another weak cry, its tiny claws snagging on his wool sweater. He tucked it inside his jacket, against the warmth of his chest, zipping it up carefully. The cub was no bigger than his two hands put together.
"It's okay, little one,"
he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years.
"I've got you."
As he stood, preparing for the trek back, a flicker of movement near the base of the fallen cedar caught his eye. Huddled in a small hollow, almost completely camouflaged against the bark and shadowed snow, was another cub. This one, however, was not a lynx. Its fur was a vibrant reddish-brown, spotted and barred with the classic markings of an American bobcat. It was slightly larger than the lynx cub, its gaze more alert, more defiant, though it too was trembling uncontrollably. Jake stared, bewildered. A lynx and a bobcat? It was unheard of. While their territories could overlap, they were competitors. He could find no sign of a mother bobcat. Had she been driven off by the storm or met a similar fate? This little one was just as orphaned, just as doomed. The bobcat cub hissed, a sound no more threatening than a leaking kettle, but its spirit was undeniable. Jake's heart, already cracked open by the plight of the first cub, broke completely. He couldn't leave it. He just couldn't. He knelt again, moving slowly, speaking in a low, soothing tone.
"Hey there, tough guy. It's all right, you're safe."
He reached out a gloved hand. The bobcat cub swatted at it, a miniature predator defending its last patch of ground. But the fight was short-lived, quickly replaced by the overwhelming need for warmth. Jake carefully gathered the second cub, this one more solid and wiry, and managed to tuck it into the other side of his parka. A low, rumbling purr, like a tiny engine struggling to start, vibrated against his ribs. He zipped his jacket to his chin, a living incubator for two rival species, and began the slow, careful journey home. As he walked, the weight against his chest was more than just physical. It was the weight of responsibility, of a future he hadn't asked for, and the first glimmer of a warmth that had nothing to do with body heat. He decided on their names then and there. The ethereal white lynx would be Luna for her moon-colored coat. The fiery, tenacious bobcat would be Rusty for his burnished fur and iron will. The first week was a harrowing ordeal that pushed Jake to the brink of his own endurance. The cubs were fragile, their lives hanging by the thinnest of threads. He converted his small spare room into a nursery, lining a large wooden crate with old blankets and placing a carefully monitored heating lamp above it. His first call was to Doc Miller, the semi-retired veterinarian in the small town of Quesnel Forks, a 2-hour drive away. The old vet's voice was gravelly over the crackling landline.
"A lynx and a bobcat? Together?"
Doc Miller had scoffed.
"Carter, you don't just find trouble, you invite it in for dinner. They'll need KMR, kitten milk replacer. And you'll need the patience of a saint. The lynx will be finicky, and the bobcat will try to eat the bottle. I'll leave a case for you at the general store."
Jake made the treacherous drive, his mind a whirlwind of anxiety. When he returned, the real work began. The nights bled into days. He fed them every 2 hours with a small syringe, then graduated to a tiny bottle. Luna was delicate, often refusing the formula, her little body racked with tremors. Jake would spend what felt like hours gently stroking her throat, whispering encouragement, his own heart seizing with fear every time she turned her head away. Rusty, true to the vet's prediction, attacked the nipple with a ferocity that belied his size, his purr a constant rumbling counterpoint to Luna's fragile silence. Jake was exhausted, running on coffee and sheer willpower. He was a father again, a role he thought he had buried forever. The motions were achingly familiar. The late-night feedings, the gentle cleaning with a warm, damp cloth to simulate a mother's tongue, the constant worry. But this time, the nursery was filled not with the scent of baby powder, but with the wild, musky smell of the forest. The sleeplessness, once a symptom of his grief, now had a purpose. In saving them, he was, piece by piece, saving himself. One evening, about a week in, Luna had a particularly bad spell. She was limp and cold, refusing all nourishment. Jake sat on the floor beside their crate, cradling her tiny form in his calloused hands, his face etched with despair. He thought he was going to lose her. Rusty, who was usually busy wrestling with a blanket, seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. He crawled out of the crate, stumbled over to Jake's leg, and began to knead it with his paws, purring with an intensity that vibrated through the floorboards. Then, he moved closer and nudged his head against Luna, letting out a series of soft chirps. As if spurred by her companion's strange encouragement, Luna stirred. Her eyes flickered open, and she let out the faintest of mews. Jake, his eyes stinging with tears, tried the bottle one more time. This time, she latched on, suckling weakly at first, then with growing strength. Rusty remained pressed against her, a tiny, furry bastion of support. In that moment, Jake understood. Their survival wasn't just dependent on him. It was dependent on each other. Whatever the laws of nature dictated about their species, here in this small, warm room, they were not competitors. They were family. As months turned into a year, then two, the cabin became a playground for the growing felines. Luna blossomed into a creature of breathtaking beauty. Her white coat was thick and luxurious, her ears tipped with long, expressive black tufts, and her massive snowshoe-like paws allowed her to move over the deepest drifts with an eerie silence. She was grace personified, a silent, watchful spirit who moved like smoke through the trees. Her piercing blue eyes held an ancient intelligence, and she would often sit for hours on the porch railing, observing the world with a regal stillness. Rusty grew into his name. He was a powerhouse of muscle and sinew, his reddish coat a vibrant splash of color against the greens and whites of the forest. He was half Luna's size but possessed twice her audacity. His mind was a sharp, inquisitive tool, constantly working to solve problems like how to open the cupboard where Jake kept the dried jerky treats, or how to bat the swinging pendulum of the grandfather clock without getting whacked. He was the court jester to Luna's queen, his boisterous energy a perfect foil for her serene composure. Their bond was the central pillar of their existence. They were rarely more than a few feet apart. They hunted together, a bizarrely effective team. Luna, the master of the silent ambush, would patiently stalk a snowshoe hare or a grouse, while Rusty, less patient but incredibly agile, would use his explosive speed to flush the prey towards her. They shared their meals without a hint of aggression, a sight that would have baffled any field biologist. At night, they would curl up together on the large bearskin rug in front of the stone fireplace, Rusty's rumbling purr a constant thrum against Luna's quieter contentment. Often, Jake would sit in his worn armchair, a book open on his lap, and just watch them. He would watch Luna meticulously groom Rusty's ears, and Rusty, in turn, nudge his head insistently under her chin. In these moments, the crushing silence of his grief was replaced by the soft sounds of their affection. They had filled the empty spaces in his home and in his heart. Jake taught them, but he also learned from them. He took them on long treks, teaching them to read the signs of the forest, to identify the scent of deer and avoid the scent of wolves. He never leashed them. He didn't need to. They saw him not as a captor, but as the anchor of their strange little pack. He was the tall, two-legged creature who provided warmth, food, and, most importantly, security. Their loyalty was tested one crisp autumn afternoon. Jake was splitting firewood when the air suddenly grew heavy. The birdsong silenced. He looked up to see a large black bear ambling out of the woods, drawn by the smell of fish Jake had smoked earlier. It was a young male, bold and hungry. Jake froze, his axe held loosely in his hand. He knew the protocols. Make yourself big, make loud noises. Before he could even shout, a reddish-brown streak shot past him. Rusty, with a guttural snarl that seemed impossible for his size, launched himself towards the bear. He wasn't attacking, but creating a diversion, darting in and out, a whirlwind of furious energy. The bear, surprised and annoyed, swatted at him. At the same time, a silent white shadow dropped from the low-hanging branch of a pine tree. Luna landed noiselessly behind the bear, her back arched, her fangs bared in a silent, terrifying threat. The bear was utterly confused. It was faced with a snarling, dancing demon in front and a silent, ghostly specter behind. It was too much chaos, too much unpredictability. With a huff of frustration, the bear turned and lumbered back into the dense forest. Rusty trotted back to Jake, chest puffed out, and rubbed against his legs with a triumphant purr. Luna appeared a moment later, her composure restored, and gave Jake a slow, deliberate blink, the ultimate sign of feline trust and affection. Jake knelt and ran his hands through their fur, his own body trembling with adrenaline and awe. They hadn't just been saved by him. Now, they had saved him. He knew, however, that this idyllic existence was on borrowed time. As a rehabilitator, his primary goal was always release. It was the law, and in his mind, the ethical imperative. To keep them would be selfish, a betrayal of their wild nature. The thought of it was a physical pain, a tearing in his chest that reminded him too much of his old loss. But he began to prepare, both them and himself. He started leaving food sources further from the cabin, encouraging them to hunt more independently. He spent less time coddling them, trying to create a distance that felt like a betrayal with every passing day. The outside world finally intruded in the form of a sleek, dark green government truck that pulled up his long driveway one summer morning. A woman stepped out. She was tall, with sharp features and an air of no-nonsense professionalism. She introduced herself as Dr. Eris Thorne from the Ministry of Forests, Lands, and Natural Resource Operations.
Mr. Carter,
she said, her eyes scanning the property, taking in the impossibly large cat tracks near the porch.
we've had reports, unconfirmed of course, about you cohabitating with 2 mature wild felids.
Jake's heart sank. He had always known this day might come.
They're not cohabitating with me, Doctor. I raised them. They were orphaned.
So the reports are true,
She stated, her tone flat. She pulled out a notepad.
A Canadian lynx and an American bobcat. Both, I presume, are now fully grown.
Yes.
Jake said quietly.
Her name is Luna. His is Rusty.
Dr. Thorne's eyebrow arched slightly at the mention of names.
Mr. Carter, you know the regulations as well as I do. Rehabilitation is for the purpose of release. Keeping apex predators as pets is not only illegal, it's dangerous. For them and for you.
They aren't pets.
Jake protested, his voice rising.
They're different.
Different how?
She challenged.
They have teeth and claws and instincts, I assume?
Just then, Rusty trotted around the side of the cabin, a field mouse dangling from his mouth. He saw a doctor. Thorne stopped and dropped the mouse on the top step as an offering before looking expectantly at Jake. A moment later, Luna emerged from the woods, moving with her signature silent grace. She ignored the newcomer completely, walked directly to Jake, and rubbed her head against his hand before settling at his feet. Dr. Thorne was momentarily speechless. She had seen captive animals, zoo animals, but this was different. There was no fear, no aggression. There was a clear, undeniable bond. Still, her professional demeanor quickly returned.
This is highly irregular,
She said, jotting notes.
and it cannot continue. They are wild animals, Mr. Carter. They have reached maturity. They need to be in their natural habitat, to find mates, to live as their species intended. I'm giving you 1 month. 1 month to sever the attachment and release them. I'll return on August 15th to oversee the process and ensure it's done correctly.
She didn't wait for an argument. She turned, got back in her truck, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and a shattered man in her wake. The next month was the most agonizing of Jake's life. He felt like a condemned man, marking off the days on his calendar. He tried to follow Dr. Thorne's directive. He pushed Luna and Rusty away. He stopped the evening ritual by the fire. He fed them at the edge of the woods and immediately retreated to the cabin. The change devastated them. Rusty would whine at the door for hours, scratching softly at the wood. Luna would sit on the porch railing, her blue eyes fixed on the window, a silent, heartbreaking vigil. Their confusion and hurt were palpable. They didn't understand why their anchor, their entire world, was suddenly rejecting them. For Jake, every mournful cry was a knife in his soul. This pain was worse than the preparation, because now it was real and it was cruel. He was breaking their hearts to save them, and he wasn't sure whose was breaking more. The morning of August 15th dawned clear and cool. It felt like a day of execution. Dr. Thorne arrived promptly at 9 a.m., her assistant with her. They had 2 large transport crates and tranquilizer equipment, just in case.
Are they ready?
She asked, her voice softened by a sliver of what might have been pity. Jake, his face a grim mask, nodded numbly. He hadn't been able to bring himself to crate them.
They're out back, by the creek.
He led the way, his steps heavy. Luna and Rusty were there, lying in a patch of sun. They looked up when he approached, their expressions a mixture of hope and caution.
This is it,
Jake said, his voice cracking. He knelt, unable to stop himself from one last goodbye. He buried his face in Luna's thick white ruff.
You have to go, girl. You have to be free.
He then turned to Rusty, scratching the robust cat behind the ears.
You be brave, tough guy. Look after her.
He stood up and walked away, not looking back, his heart a hollow, aching void. He gave Dr. Thorne a curt nod.
They're all yours.
Dr. Thorne and her assistant approached the cats cautiously. The plan was to herd them towards the deep woods, away from the cabin, to give them the best chance of reverting to their wild instincts. They clapped their hands and made shooing noises. Luna rose with regal dignity. Rusty got to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest. They looked at the two strangers, then at the vast, beckoning wilderness behind them. For a moment, it seemed to be working. Luna took a few steps towards the forest, her natural home. Rusty followed. Jake closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. It was done. The silence was returning. But then, he heard Dr. Thorne's sharp intake of breath.
I don't believe it.
Jake opened his eyes. Luna had stopped at the edge of the trees. She had turned around. With a deliberate, unhurried pace, she walked back across the clearing, straight past the stunned wildlife officials, and sat down at Jake's feet, pressing her body against his leg. Rusty, seeing his companions move, abandoned all pretense of leaving. He bounded back to Jake, purring like a motorboat, and began weaving between his legs, rubbing his scent glands on Jake's jeans in a clear act of ownership. He then looked up at Dr. Thorne and let out a defiant chirp. Everyone was shocked. It was a stunning, unequivocal rejection of freedom. They had been offered the wild, their birthright, and they had turned their backs on it. They had chosen him. Dr. Thorne stood frozen, her clipboard hanging limply at her side. All her training, all her textbooks, all her experience told her this was impossible. Wild animals, given the choice, always choose the wild. They don't domesticate themselves. They don't form these kinds of unbreakable, interspecies familial bonds that supersede their own biology. She walked slowly towards Jake, her eyes not on him, but on the two magnificent creatures who were guarding him as if he were the most precious thing in the world. She saw the way Luna's gaze softened when she looked at him, the way Rusty leaned into his touch. She saw the trio not as a man and two animals, but as a single, cohesive unit.
In 20 years of field work,
She said, her voice barely a whisper.
I have never seen anything like this.
She looked at Jake, and for the first time, she saw not a reckless hermit, but a man who had provided something so profound that it had literally reshaped the nature of the animals in his care.
They can't be released.
She stated, not as a concession, but as a fact.
It would be a death sentence. They wouldn't survive. Their identity is here, with you.
Tears were now flowing freely down Jake's face, but they were tears of overwhelming relief and joy. He sank to his knees and wrapped his arms around both of his companions, who pressed in against him, their purrs a symphony of reunion. Dr. Thorne watched for a long moment, a slow smile spreading across her face. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a sense of wonder.
I'm going to have a hell of a time with the paperwork,
She said, shaking her head.
but I'll classify this property as a unique private sanctuary, with you as the permanent, state-sanctioned warden. They can live out their lives here, in peace, together.
The story of the man, the lynx, and the bobcat became a quiet legend in the region. Dr. Thorne's official report, though heavily redacted, spoke of an unprecedented symbiotic attachment and a bond that defied conventional ecological understanding. Visitors were few and far between, a condition Jake insisted upon. But those who did come, vets, researchers, the occasional lost hiker, left with a sense of having witnessed something sacred. Years passed. Jake's hair turned from brown to gray, matching the winter landscape. Luna remained a creature of ethereal beauty, her movements still silent, her wisdom deep. Rusty, though his muzzle was now frosted with white, was still the spirited heart of the family, his antics a source of daily laughter. One cool summer evening, the three of them were on the porch, their old ritual restored. Jake sat in his rocking chair, a steaming mug of tea in his hands. Luna lay stretched out on the railing, a pale queen surveying her kingdom. Rusty was curled up at Jake's feet, his head resting on Jake's boot. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the same colors as Rusty's vibrant coat. So Jake looked at the two creatures who had stumbled into his life and healed the parts of him he thought were lost forever. They had not replaced the family he had lost. Nothing ever could. But they had built a new one in the ruins of his heart. The shock that day wasn't just that they had refused to leave. The real shock was the profound, undeniable truth they had revealed to everyone who witnessed it. That the deepest bonds are not forged by blood or by species, but are woven from the threads of shared loss, fierce loyalty, and a love so powerful it can tame the wildest of hearts, both animal and human alike. And in the quiet wilderness of British Columbia, under the watchful eyes of the mountains, their extraordinary family was and would always be home.